She was born to obey, but in the middle of a battlefield, with arrows aimed at her heart, Princess Elira defied a king and chose her own destiny. Torn between the blood that raised her and the truth that freed her, she stood alone between two armies, risking everything for a love that could unite enemies or destroy them both. This is not just a story of war. It's about breaking chains, exposing lies, and choosing who you truly are when the world demands silence. If you believe courage can change a kingdom, comment below. I choose truth. The first light of dawn kissed the silver spires of Thalvor's palace, casting a golden hue over its marble courtyards. But within the grand halls, that light did not reach the hearts of those who lived there. The corridors echoed with quiet footsteps, and behind heavy doors, silence reigned like a second monarch. In her chamber high above the city, Princess Elira stood motionless before an ornate mirror framed in gold and ivy. Her gown shimmered like sunlight on still water, delicate, regal, perfect. But her face was a mask, composed, hollow. She tilted her head slightly, lifting the corners of her lips. A smile formed, beautiful and dead. Not enough, she whispered to her reflection. You must look happy. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the comb of carved pearl, smoothing back a lock of raven black hair that dared defy her. Outside, the bells began to chime, a signal of ceremony, a warning. The door creaked open. King Oren, her father, stepped inside, cloaked in violet and lined with the scent of iron and incense. His crown sat heavy on his brow, but not nearly as heavy as the expectations in his eyes. "Elira," he said, voice calm but commanding, "you are ready." She turned slowly, hands folded like a statue carved by duty. "I am as ready as I must be." He stepped closer, placing a gloved hand on her shoulder. "You were born to protect this kingdom," he said, not unkindly, "even if it costs you yourself." Her throat tightened. "Yes, father." What she did not say was this: she had never lived for herself. She had never even dreamed of it. Duke Renard awaited her, a man twice her age, infamous for cruelty masked in charm, for hunting men the way others hunted deer. She had met him once. He had smiled at her with teeth too white and eyes too cold. Their marriage was a treaty inked not in love, but in desperation. Tomorrow she would be sent to his fortress in the southern hills, but fate, it seemed, had grown tired of waiting. 2 days later, Elira rode north in a velvet-lined carriage, surrounded by knights bearing Thalvor's golden banners. The official story was that she would speak on behalf of the crown, a gesture of goodwill to the wild tribes of the north. The truth was simpler, a distraction, one last performance before her caged future. The forests grew thicker, the snow deeper. Then, just as the sun began to fall behind the jagged cliffs of the borderlands, screams. The carriage jerked violently. Hooves thundered, steel clashed. Her door burst open and a hand yanked her into the snow, binding her wrists before she could cry out. "Protect the princess!" someone shouted. Then an arrow, a scream, silence. Elira's face was pressed into ice. She could hear breath, rough and foreign, above her. Voices barked orders in a language she did not understand. Then darkness, a blindfold, and the long drag into the unknown. She tried to stay still, to gather her thoughts, but fear moved faster than reason. All she knew of the North were tales told by her tutors, savages, skinners, beasts. She expected pain, torture, death. But when the blindfold was pulled away, what she found was firelight, smoke, and silence. A great wooden hall surrounded her, carved with symbols that pulsed in the torchlight. Her wrists were still bound, her body aching, but she was alive. And before her, standing like a monument of battle and shadow, was Kale, tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes like winter storms and a jagged scar cutting across his cheek. He looked every bit the warrior her stories had warned of, but his gaze held no glee, no cruelty, only calculation. Behind him, men and women in fur and leather stared at her like she was a viper. She could feel their hate, but no one struck her. No one spoke. She was not touched, not harmed. She was respected. Elira's voice cracked through the tension. "What do you want from me?" Kyle didn't answer. He turned and walked away, his heavy boots echoing on the wooden floor. She was left alone, bound, in the warmth of a fire that offered no comfort. In her mind, one truth echoed louder than the rest. She had not been taken to die. But whatever fate awaited her among these wolves, it was only just beginning. She woke to the crackling of fire and the distant howl of wind against wood. The scent of smoke, leather, and something faintly metallic hung heavy in the air. Elira's eyes fluttered open, adjusting slowly to the dim glow around her. She was no longer in the snow, no longer bound. Her wrists were bruised. Red marks like shackles still raw against her pale skin, but the ropes were gone. She lay on a thick bed of furs inside a vast wooden hall, the ceiling high and sloped, beams lined with symbols and runes she could not read. Shadows danced across the walls, flickering with each pop of the flames. A fire burned at the center of the room, its warmth battling the bite of the cold that seeped through the cracks. Movement caught her eye. A figure stood near the entrance, framed by the orange light, still, watching. Kyle. He stood like a statue carved from war, tall, broad, his arms crossed over his chest. The firelight kissed the lines of old scars running down his neck and collarbone, each one a silent testament to battles survived. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were thunderclouds. Elira pulled the furs closer around her body and sat up slowly, legs trembling beneath her. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse. No response. "What do you want from me?" Kyle didn't move. He simply stared at her, as if weighing something invisible between them. Then he turned and walked out. A gust of cold air rushed in behind him, and with it, the voices of others. Rough, sharp, angry. They spoke in a language Elira didn't know, but she didn't need translation. She could feel the venom in their tones. She was not welcome here. A woman entered next. Older, with silver hair tied in braids and eyes like flint. She approached with a bowl of steaming broth and placed it near the fire, without a word. Elira watched her carefully. "Do you understand me?" The woman nodded but said nothing. She gestured to the bowl, then to Elira's stomach. The message was clear. "Eat." Elira hesitated. She thought of poison, of traps, of lessons whispered in palace corridors about how to outlast a captor. But her hunger betrayed her fear. She reached out, lifted the bowl, and took a cautious sip. It was hot, rich with meat, herbs, and something smoky, not royal fare, but nourishing. The woman sat beside the fire, hands folded in her lap. Elira looked at her again. "What is your name?" Still silence. But the woman met her gaze, and something in it wasn't cruel, just cautious. "Mine is Elira," the princess offered gently, "of House Thalvor." At this, the woman's eyes darkened, her lips thinned, and she rose abruptly, vanishing through the same door Kyle had used. Elira was alone again. She wrapped the furs tighter and looked around the hall. Shields lined the walls. Blades rested in notches carved into the timber. Animal hides were draped over wooden benches. This was not a prison. It was a gathering place, a chieftain's house, a throne room of sorts. The fire crackled, filling the silence like a heartbeat. Days passed. Though Elira lost count of how many, she was watched at all times, fed twice a day, allowed to walk in a small, enclosed yard behind the hall, always under guard. Her cell, though not a cage, was marked by invisible borders she dared not cross. Still, no one laid a hand on her, not to strike nor to comfort. She kept expecting pain, or threats, or interrogation. But what she received was indifference. It was maddening. And then, on the fourth night, everything changed. A storm howled outside. Snow slammed against the walls like fists. The fire roared as if sensing the growing fury beyond. Elira sat in her corner, wrapped in furs, when the door opened again. Kyle. This time, he did not stand still. He walked toward her slowly, eyes fixed on her face. She rose to meet him, chin held high despite the fear clawing at her chest. "You haven't spoken to me," she said. "You watch me like an animal. Why?" Kyle didn't answer immediately. He looked past her, toward the fire, then down at his own hands. They were calloused, covered in faded scars and fresh burns. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and rough, as if it hadn't been used in days. "You think we're beasts," he said, "because that's the only story you were told." His accent was thick, but his words were clear. Elira's heart jolted. "You speak my language. I know the tongue of liars." She flinched, but didn't back down. "I was taught you were killers, that your people flayed prisoners, burned villages." His eyes locked onto hers, hard and sharp. "And what were you told of your king?" Elira opened her mouth, then closed it. The answer died before it was born. Kyle stepped closer. The fire lit the lines of his face, casting half of him in shadow. "What do you really know of war, princess?" "I know loss," she whispered. "I know fear." He studied her. Then, without another word, he sat across from her near the fire. She didn't move. "Why am I here?" she asked finally. "Because if it had been up to the others," he said, "you would already be dead." His honesty struck harder than any threat. "You spared me. I don't need another ghost haunting my nights." That silence returned, thick, heavy, fragile. And yet something passed between them then. Not forgiveness, not understanding, but the absence of hatred. The next morning, Elira found a small piece of parchment placed beside her bowl. A single symbol had been drawn on it, a Skarn rune. She frowned. A test. Later, the same silver-haired woman returned, this time carrying a flat piece of bark and charcoal. She pointed to the symbol and then to herself. "Elna," she said. Elira blinked. The woman was teaching her. She pointed at Elira next, waiting. "Elira," she replied. Elna nodded once, and so it began. Each day, Elna returned. Each day, Elira learned one word, one gesture, one truth at a time. The Skarn language was sharp and beautiful, full of emotion tied to nature, to family, to survival. And slowly, so slowly, she began to understand. Kyle spoke rarely, but when he did, it was with purpose. He answered her questions about the land, about the wolves that howled beyond the walls, about the stars they used for direction. He never spoke of himself. One night, as they sat by the fire, she asked, "Why do you let them hate me?" Kyle looked into the flames. "Because you wear the face of the empire that burned our homes." "But I didn't." "I know." His eyes met hers. "But that doesn't change the ashes." A pause. "Why do you stay near me, then?" Kyle didn't blink. "Because you don't look away." The words hit her harder than any blow. She lowered her eyes, unsure of the knot tightening in her chest. That night, she dreamed of fire and wolves, of eyes like storms and hands reaching through darkness, of Kyle. In the following days, she began to see beyond the myths. She met a boy no older than 10, who carried a wooden sword and asked if she had ever seen the sea, a mother who hummed lullabies while weaving, an old man with one leg who carved animals out of bone. They were not monsters, they were people. And slowly, quietly, Elira began to unravel. One evening, as snow fell in soft sheets beyond the hall, she brought a book, her only possession, and opened it by the fire. Kyle sat near, sharpening his blade. "Do you know how your story is told in Thalvor?" she asked. He didn't look up. "I've heard enough lies to fill a grave." She read anyway. A passage from the Royal Chronicles, about a rebellion, a slaughter, a warning. Kyle stood and walked to her. "That page," he said, pointing, "it speaks of the northern tribes burning Thalvor's granaries." "Yes." He knelt beside her, took a piece of charcoal, and on the edge of the page he wrote a single word in Skarn. "Lie." Elira stared at it, at the word scorched across her lineage. across her education. She looked up at him, her voice unsteady. Then what really happened? Kyle stared at the fire. They came at night, your king's men. They called it a negotiation. We opened our gates. They killed our elders while they slept. She couldn't breathe. Why would they? To claim our land, to build your roads, your trade routes, and the Skarn who fought back. We became your monsters. Silence choked the hall. Elira closed the book, and something in her heart cracked. For the first time in her life, she didn't know who she was meant to be. Kyle stood. She reached for his arm, gently. He looked down at her hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He didn't answer, but he didn't pull away. That night, they sat closer to the fire than before, and when their hands brushed, neither of them moved. Not out of fear, but something far more dangerous. Recognition. The snow had begun to thaw. It came slowly, in timid drips from the eaves of the great hall, in the soft squelch of softened earth beneath Elira's boots when she walked the outer yard. The bitter cold still clung to the air, but there was change in it, as if even the land itself held its breath. Elira had stopped counting the days. Time moved differently here, measured not by bells or scrolls, but by firelight and spoken stories, by the feel of a rising wind or the crack of ice splitting on stone. In the absence of royal duties, of silken gowns and scripted phrases, she had found something unfamiliar: space to feel. Kyle no longer watched her from a distance. He sat beside her by the fire in the evenings, offered short answers to her questions, sometimes even a glance that lingered too long. And in those silences between them, thick with something unnamed, Elira felt the impossible stirring within her, a sense of belonging she had never known. But it was not peace that stirred the world around them. The Skarn moved like soldiers now, quiet, calculated, preparing. And with it came whispers, broken fragments of conversation between warriors, hushed words exchanged behind closed doors. She wasn't supposed to hear them, but she did. And then, one night, Mira came to her. Elira had seen the elder woman before, sharp-eyed and quiet, her presence always followed by a hush among the others. Tonight, she entered the hall with a purpose, clutching something wrapped in dark cloth. Kyle had just left for patrol, the flames flickering behind him. Elira sat alone, mending the loose threads of her cloak. Mira didn't speak as she crossed the floor. She sat down with the weight of someone who had carried too many years, too many graves. Her fingers unwrapped the cloth with care, revealing a long blade, not sharpened for war, but ceremonial, ancient. Elira blinked. "What is that?" Mira didn't answer. Instead, she turned the hilt toward Elira. "This," the woman finally said, her voice low and edged with something brittle, "belonged to his father." Elira stared at the weapon. "Kyle's?" Mira nodded once. "Before your king murdered him." The air drained from the room. Elira's fingers hovered just above the blade, not daring to touch it. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Her thoughts collided with one another. Lies she had memorized, truths she had never questioned. "That's not possible," she said weakly. Mira's voice grew sharper. "You wear your crown in your bones, girl. You know what power does. You've seen it." Elira's throat tightened. "Why are you telling me this?" Mira's eyes darkened, twin storms in a face carved from stone. "Because you are not like the others. You look, you listen, and because he will not tell you." Elira's breath stilled. He's the heir." Mira nodded. "Stolen as a boy, hidden by survivors, raised to forget who he was. Does he know?" "Yes, and he carries the weight of it like a curse." Elira looked down at the blade again, her pulse hammering in her ears. It was simple but elegant, the emblem of the old Skarn kings etched into the steel, a crescent moon and a stag. Her father's symbol was a lion that devoured. "But if this is true, why hasn't he claimed it?" Mira's voice softened. "Because his heart is not made for thrones. It is made for truth." Elira stared into the fire, her hands trembling. Mira stood slowly, rewrapping the blade in silence. "You will see, child." The storm has already begun." Then she left, her footsteps as quiet as her arrival. Elira sat there for a long time, the shadows growing longer around her. Her heart felt like glass, cracked from within. She couldn't stop the storm in her thoughts, each memory folding back on itself with new meaning. The restraint in Kyle's voice, the burden in his eyes, his hatred of violence, his refusal to lead. He didn't want to be a king. He wanted peace, but peace would not wait for him. The next morning, she found him outside the hall, sharpening his blade in the frost-laced sunlight. His breath rose in clouds, his expression unreadable. She stepped up behind him. "Why didn't you tell me?" He paused, the scraping of metal against stone stilled. "I didn't need to," he said. Elira's jaw clenched. "You're the rightful heir, the son of the Skarn king. The truth could change everything." Kale turned his head, slowly. "You think names change war? They can, if people believe." He stood, his full height a wall of strength and scars. "Belief got my father killed. It got my mother slaughtered in front of me. I was 6. Elira's breath caught. "I don't want a throne," he said, voice rough. "I want no more children to wake to fire. I want no more graves." "But the army from Thalvor," she began. "Will come," Kyle interrupted, "because your father cannot leave wounds unpunished. He needs a reason to crush us again. He always has." "And you won't fight back?" Kyle stepped closer, his voice low. "I will fight to protect my people, but I will not become what he is. I will not spill blood to wear a crown I never wanted." Elira looked at him, truly looked, not at the warrior or the scars or the title hidden in his blood, but at the man, and she knew he meant every word. Later that day, a rider arrived. He was young, panting. His horse foamed with sweat. Kyle met him outside the village, and Elira followed, heart already sinking. The message was delivered in quick, clipped words, a scout's report. Kyle translated without embellishment. "Thalvor's army is on the move," he said. 3 battalions headed north, 10 days away." Elira's stomach dropped, her hands curled into fists. Her father had declared Kale a threat, and war was coming. That night, the village gathered around the fire pit, warriors armed and ready, elders whispering to one another in solemn tones. The children had been sent away, hidden in the caves deep within the hills. It was a ritual as old as the war itself. Elira stood at the edge, eyes fixed on the flames. Kyle approached her, his cloak dusted with snow. He looked like a king without wanting to be one. "I should hate you," he said softly. She turned to him. "Then why don't you?" Kyle met her eyes. "Because when I look at you, I forget what war tastes like." Elira swallowed hard. Her hand found his, slow and hesitant. He didn't pull away. They stood like that, firelight flickering between them, until she leaned in, drawn not by logic, but by something ancient and unsaid. Their lips met in a kiss that trembled at the edges, tender and fierce, a clash of everything forbidden. It tasted of ash and longing, of choices not yet made. When they pulled apart, the world was quieter. She looked up at him. "I have to go back." Kyle's brows drew together. "What?" "I'll return to Thalvor," she said. "Pretend I escaped. Try to stop the war from within. They'll imprison you, or worse." She nodded. "Probably." "Why?" he demanded, pain breaking through his calm. "Because if I don't, thousands will die. Because I know my father. He'll kill your people to protect his lie, and I can't let that happen." Kyle shook his head. "Elira, you said you didn't want the crown," she whispered. "Then let me wear mine. Let me use the one thing I have left." He looked at her then, as if he were memorizing every detail, her eyes, her voice, her defiance. "You are mad," he said quietly. She smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I'm still going." He didn't stop her. But when she left before dawn, wrapped in a stolen cloak and riding a borrowed horse toward the rising sun, he watched from the cliffs above, a lone figure etched in frost. He watched her until she vanished, and then He turned back to prepare for the war neither of them wanted. Below him, the wind carried her scent, and with it, the memory of a kiss born in fire. Elira rode for Thalvor with her heart full of ghosts, and a single truth burning in her chest. She was no longer anyone's prisoner. She was the storm. The gates of Thalvor loomed in the distance, sharp and merciless against the pale morning sky. Their spires gleamed like polished knives, a fortress of stone and silence. Elira had never felt smaller in its shadow, not even as a child. Her cloak was torn, her cheeks wind-burned, and her horse stumbled beneath her, exhausted from days of riding through the bitter cold. She looked nothing like a princess, returning from war. She looked like a fugitive. She approached the southern checkpoint at dawn. The guards didn't recognize her at first. Her hair was undone, her skin smudged with dirt and dried blood from a fall 2 nights before. But the moment she shouted her name, shouted it like a declaration, not a plea, they snapped to attention. Whispers passed like sparks. The princess has returned, alone. Within an hour, she was escorted inside the castle walls, flanked by spearmen, their armor glinting in the morning sun. The cold was different here, clean, controlled. It reeked of perfumed politics and smoke rising from chimneys, not from burning villages. Elira barely registered the familiar halls. They felt foreign now, smaller, shallower. Her feet echoed against polished stone as she passed tapestries she used to admire, columns she once leaned against in silence. Servants watched her from behind doors, their expressions twisted in a mix of awe and fear. By the time they reached the throne room, her hands were trembling. The doors creaked open. Her father sat on the high seat, framed by 2 roaring braziers. He wore his crown today, not the ceremonial gold circlet, but the heavier one of iron and onyx, the one he wore during council, judgment, and war. King Orin was not an old man, but he seemed to have aged 10 winters in her absence. His beard was darker, fuller, and his eyes sharper than she remembered. A lion still, but one beginning to bleed beneath the fur. He stood when he saw her. Elira! The sound of her name in his voice sent something cold crawling down her spine. She stopped several paces from the dais, refusing to kneel. "I was told you were dead," he said. "I was taken. By the Skarn. Yes, and yet here you are." He tilted his head. "Not torn apart, not flayed, not even chained. I escaped." He stepped down from the throne slowly, each footfall deliberate. "How?" She didn't flinch. "I saw a chance. I took it." He studied her face, searching for cracks. "You lie." "I survived. And what did they show you in the north?" His tone was dangerously soft. "A boy with kind eyes. Stories about the poor, misunderstood savages. They showed me the truth." That stopped him, just for a moment. "You sound like your mother. She wouldn't have stood for this war." "No," he agreed. "Which is why she never ruled." The words hit her like a slap. Elira's fists clenched at her sides. "The Skarn didn't start this." He turned away, walking slowly toward the fire. "They burned villages. After you butchered their elders." He froze. She pressed on. "You called it a negotiation, but you sent assassins. You slaughtered their leaders in their sleep and blamed the survivors." He didn't turn around. "You erased a bloodline, father. You tried to erase a throne." Now he turned. "I did what was necessary. You made a king out of a ghost. His name is Kale." The name rang through the chamber like a sword strike. Several guards shifted uneasily. Orin's jaw tightened. "So, that's what this is. You fell for him. I saw what you tried to destroy. I saved this kingdom from a rebellion. You created the rebellion. You murdered peace before it could even speak." Orin stepped forward again, his voice rising. "You think you know the world now because you spent a few weeks playing peasant in the snow. You think you understand loyalty, sacrifice. I understand what it means to choose," Elira said, her voice firm. "And I will not be a pawn anymore." For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of flame. Then he nodded to the guards. "Take her to the dungeons." Two soldiers advanced without hesitation. Elira didn't fight them. Her father watched as she was dragged away, his expression unreadable. In the silence of the cell, Elira sat against the damp wall, her breath steady despite the cold stone pressing into her spine. Her wrists were chained again, this time by her own blood. Above her, the city prepared for war. She heard the clatter of armor being readied, the distant thunder of hooves. She imagined catapults being rolled to the edge of the northern road, soldiers sharpening blades meant for innocent throats. And she knew she had failed until she heard a whisper, "Elira." She looked up. A figure crouched near the bars, a woman in servant's robes, face hidden beneath a shawl. But the voice, it was familiar. "Maela," Elira breathed. Her former maid, once dismissed, now returned. "Shh," Maela hissed, pulling a key from beneath her cloak. "There's no time." Elira's heart pounded. "You're working with them. I never stopped working for you." The lock clicked. The chains fell. "How?" "Kyle has eyes here, loyal ones. You're not alone." They moved fast, through secret passages behind the walls, down narrow stairwells that smelled of ash and mold. Maela led her to the stables, where a horse waited, already saddled. Elira mounted, her hands trembling. "Ride north," Maela said. "They'll be waiting." Elira reached down, gripped her hand. "Thank you." Maela smiled, fierce and proud. "Bring this kingdom back." She rode hard, through the dark, through frozen rivers and hidden paths only the servants knew. Her muscles burned, her wounds reopened, but she didn't stop, and when she crested the last ridge before the northern plains, she saw them, Skarn warriors, blades drawn, standing in lines like forest trees, waiting. Kyle was at their head. He looked up as she approached, eyes wide. She slid from the saddle and stumbled forward. He caught her before she fell. "Elira," he breathed. "What happened?" "They're coming," she rasped. "Your father is marching toward the north with everything he has." He looked into her face. "Did they hurt you?" She shook her head. "Not enough to stop me." He held her for a long moment, the war momentarily forgotten. Then they turned together toward the horizon. Smoke, dust. The banners of Thalvor rising, a line of gold in a sea of white. "They outnumber us 10-1, Kyle said. "Then we have one chance." Kyle frowned. "What chance?" "I know how this ends," she said. "If we fight as they expect, we die. But if I speak before the first arrow is loosed, they might listen, just long enough." "It's too dangerous." "They don't know you," she said. "But they know me." He shook his head. "You've risked too much already." She stepped forward. "Then let me finish what I started." Kyle looked at her, truly looked, as if weighing her soul against the sky. Then he gave her a single nod. The day broke with a stillness so unnatural it felt like time itself was holding its breath. On one side, the golden banners of Thalvor fluttered in the wind, the sound of drums building like a heartbeat. On the other, the Skarn stood silent, unmoving, their weapons buried in the snow, their eyes locked on the coming storm. Elira stepped between them. She walked slowly, deliberately, toward the center of the field, alone, unarmed. Behind her, Kyle followed, silent, regal in his armor of iron and bone. The Thalvor army shifted. Murmurs rose. Archers lifted their bows. Then Elira shouted, "Soldiers of Thalvor!" Her voice echoed across the frozen plain. "You fight for a lie." Silence. She raised her arms, spinning to face them all. "You were told the Skarn are monsters, that they burn, that they slaughter, that they would devour us if we did not strike first. But the truth is this, your king made them monsters. He killed their leaders in cold blood. He murdered children to claim their lands." Gasps rippled through the front lines. "And now he sends you, good men and women, to finish the blood he started." She turned to the Skarn side. "This man," she pointed to Kale, "is Kale, son of the North. He is no barbarian. He is your prince, the rightful heir to the throne, stolen by fire and deceit." She looked back toward the Thalvor lines. "I am Elira of House Thalvor, not a pawn, not a prize. but a woman who chooses her future. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. I will not be queen by marriage. I will not be queen by force. I will be queen by truth. And I choose this man. I choose this people. I choose a kingdom built not on blood, but on choice. The field held its breath. Then someone, a single soldier, dropped his sword. It hit the ground with a soft thud. Then another and another. Bows were lowered, and the war died before it began. The battlefield was silent. Snowflakes drifted between the lines of soldiers like ash. For one eternal heartbeat, it seemed no one dared breathe. The sound of falling weapons echoed louder than thunder. One sword, then two, then 10. Metal kissed snow in a steady rhythm, as if the earth itself was releasing a breath it had held for a generation. Elira stood between the armies, the wind catching her cloak and hair, the cold biting her cheeks. Her voice still trembled in her chest, raw from the weight of what she had just declared. She looked to the soldiers of Thalvor, men and women who had trained since childhood to obey, to fight, to never question, and they were hesitating. Not because they were cowards, but because they had finally been given a reason not to die. Behind her, Kyle remained still. His eyes never left the enemy ranks, but his hand hovered near the hilt of his sword. He knew it could still go wrong. A single volley of arrows, a commander too proud to bow. But then he saw it, the smallest shift in the enemy formation. A man, tall and weathered, stepped forward from the Thalvor side. His armor bore the insignia of a lion on fire. General Corin, the king's warhound. He approached Elira slowly, his steps precise. He did not draw his blade. When he stopped before her, he looked not at her, but at Kale. "You're the one they whisper about," Corin said. "The dead prince." Kale's voice was calm. "I was never dead, just forgotten." Corin studied him for a long moment, then turned to Elira. "You stand against your own blood," he said. "I stand for the truth." Corin's expression didn't change. "And what do you think truth will buy you, princess? Thrones are not built with truth. They are built with bodies." Elira's chin lifted. "Then it's time to build something different." Behind Corin, the soldiers were watching, waiting. Most still held their weapons, but their hands were lower now, their postures uncertain. This wasn't what they had been promised. The enemy wasn't charging. There was no war cry, just two people in the snow, speaking of peace. "I've served your father for 30 years, Corin said. "I've killed in his name, lied in it, burned villages because he called it duty. I believed it once." His voice lowered. "But today, I see something I've never seen in this kingdom." He turned back to his men. "Choice." And then, with deliberate slowness, General Corin dropped his sword. The silence cracked. The front line followed. Within moments, Thalvor's great army was unarmed. Shields rested in the snow. Helmets came off. Some wept. Some stood frozen, unsure what they were even fighting for anymore. Kyle stepped forward now, coming to Elira's side. Their fingers brushed, but it wasn't over yet. From the back ranks of the Thalvor forces, a sound began to rise. Hoofbeats. Then a column split the army in two. A royal standard gleamed atop a golden pole. The lion crest of King Oren. He had come in person. A hush fell again as his black warhorse trotted forward. His armor was darker than night, trimmed with blood-red silk. A sword rested across his lap. His face was carved from stone, but fury glowed behind his eyes. The king stopped just beyond the circle of disarmed soldiers and surveyed the scene. His gaze fell first on Kale, then on Elira, then on Corin. He dismounted slowly, every movement calculated. "Is this treason?" he asked, his voice calm and chilling. "Or madness?" Elira stepped forward. "It's truth, and it's over." Oren walked toward her, boots crunching over fallen steel. "You dare raise your voice against your king? I raise it for my people, and for the son you tried to erase." He faced Kale now, expression unreadable. "I should have had you killed as a child." "You tried," Kale answered. "You were nothing, a boy born of dirt, an inconvenience." Kale didn't flinch. And yet, I'm still here. Do you think this makes you a ruler? Oren hissed. A gathering of traitors and sheep. Elira's voice rang clear. No, but it makes us free. Oren drew his sword. Kyle did the same. No more armies, Oren said. No more speeches. Let it end with blood. The circle cleared around them. The soldiers stepped back. Kyle and Oren faced each other beneath the falling snow. Two sons of a broken kingdom, one born to power, the other to ashes. The king struck first. He came fast, heavy, trained to kill. Kyle met him with speed, blocking blow after blow, their blades screaming with each clash. Sparks flew. Steel met steel. The rhythm was brutal, not a duel, but a reckoning. Oren was powerful, but Kyle was determined. He fought not to conquer, not to claim, but to defend what he believed in. Every strike he parried was a name remembered, every counter a prayer for the fallen. Elira watched with her heart in her throat. The snow turned red, a final clash, and then Kyle's sword slid beneath the king's guard, cutting across his ribs. Oren staggered back, blood seeping from his side, but he wasn't finished. With a roar, he charged again. Blind with fury, Kyle stepped aside and drove his sword through the king's chest. Time stopped. Oren gasped, hands gripping the blade, his body trembling, his eyes locked with Kyle's. And in that moment, Elira saw not a king, but a man afraid of the world he had built. He fell to his knees, then to the snow. Silence reigned. Kyle stood over him, breath ragged. Blood stained his armor, his hands, the snow beneath his boots. He turned to Elira. She crossed the space between them and placed a hand on his chest, right over his heart. "It's done," she whispered. "No," Kyle said softly. "It's just beginning." Together, they turned to the armies. Elira stepped forward once more. "I do not ask for your loyalty," she said, voice steady despite the weight on her shoulders. "I ask for your choice." She looked at the soldiers of Thalvor, then the Skarn, her eyes shining. Let the throne no longer belong to one bloodline. Let it belong to the people. Let it be earned, not inherited. Let it be chosen. And then she did the unthinkable. She took off the circlet from her head, the one she had worn since childhood, and laid it in the snow. "I am Elira of Thalvor, and today I am not your princess. I am your servant." The people stared, and then, slowly, someone knelt, then another, and another, not in submission, but in unity. Kale looked to her and she to him. They had not won through conquest. They had not seized power through lies or bloodlines. They had earned it through truth. And the world, that broken, bleeding world, had finally listened. The fires of war died in the snow, and in their place, something new began to grow. Snow still blanketed the fields where two armies had once stood poised for slaughter. But now, the air no longer trembled with tension, only with the hushed wonder of something new. All around them, warriors of Thalvor and the Skarn moved among one another, not as enemies, but as men and women burdened by the same question: what comes after the war that never was? Elira stood on the rise, where her crown lay buried in snow, the thin circle of gold now dulled by frost. Around her, the field was dotted with signs of peace being born. Soldiers helping one another collect the fallen blades, commanders offering their armorless hands to those they once swore to kill. There were no victors here, only survivors. Witnesses to the ending of a history soaked in betrayal. Kyle had disappeared for a while after the battle. She had let him go, sensing that silence was a kind of mourning he needed. But when he returned that evening, walking through the last pink light of dusk, his eyes met hers with an honesty that made her breath catch. He approached quietly, his steps slow but steady. The sword he had used to strike down King Oren was no longer at his hip. He had left it in the snow, blade down. Elira turned to face him. "You buried it." He nodded. "I never want to see it again." She nodded in return, understanding more than words could say. He came to stand beside her, both watching as the last fires of the army camps dwindled below them. The others are asking what happens now, Kyle said softly. They want to know who will lead, who will sit the throne. They want a king, Elira said, her voice quiet, or a queen. He looked at her. They want justice. And you? She asked. What do you want? Kyle was silent for a long moment. Then, finally, he spoke. I want peace. Not the kind written into treaties with ink that washes away in rain. I want peace that lives in people's bones, in their children, in their stories. She turned to him fully, stepping closer. You could have it. You could rule. Kyle shook his head. I never wanted to rule. I only wanted to be free. You are free, she whispered. And so am I. His eyes searched hers, and something passed between them, not the fire of rebellion, nor the ache of grief, but something steadier, stronger, a quiet understanding that what they had built could last, if they dared to keep it alive. Elira reached for his hand. He took it without hesitation. Then we don't need thrones, she said. We only need each other. But the people still gathered, day after day. Survivors from the villages of the north. Nobles from Thalvor who had fled when the king fell, soldiers who had thrown down their weapons and now waited for direction. And Elira realized something she hadn't allowed herself to believe until now. She was no longer just a symbol of rebellion. She was hope. It began with one camp, then two, then dozens. Families settled where the frost began to thaw. Fires lit at night, not for war, but warmth. Kyle led hunts in the forest, while Elira met with the old scribes of Thalvor and the wise women of the Skarn, learning their laws, their traditions, their dreams. And together, they began to write something new. They drafted a council, half from the north, half from Thalvor. Every village would send a voice. Every voice would have a vote. No bloodline would decide alone. The throne room that had once stood in Thalvor's capital was abandoned. In its place, they raised a hall at the meeting point between their two lands, made not of gold and marble, but stone and wood, carved with the symbols of both nations, the stag and the lion, finally side by side. And still, they asked her, "Will you be queen?" Elira stood before the council on the first day of spring. The room was full, warriors, farmers, healers, teachers, Kyle at her side. She looked to them all and spoke with a voice steadied by fire and forged in truth. "I was born into a crown I did not choose," she said. "Promised to a man I did not love. Trained to speak, but never be heard. But I've seen a different world now. A better one." She let the silence settle. "I will not rule you. I will serve you. If you would have me, I will stand with this council. I will listen. I will speak. And I will never forget where we came from. There was no cheer, no applause, only a deep, resounding silence of agreement, the kind that doesn't need noise to be true." Kyle stepped forward next. "I was born in blood," he said, "and raised in the shadow of a crown, but I never wore it. I never wanted to. And yet, I have seen what power can become in the wrong hands. I would rather die than become that." He took Elira's hand again. "But I will stand with her, with you, as your equal, not your ruler." And so it began. There were challenges, of course, former nobles who resisted the loss of their titles, tribal leaders unwilling to forgive, wounds that reopened before they could heal. But Elira and Kale met each storm with the same truth that had stopped the war. They chose each other, and through them, the people learned to choose too. Years passed. Children were born who never learned to hate the other side. Bridges were built where walls had once stood. The stories of the Skarn and the people of Thalvor were woven together, not erased, but preserved, so that none would forget what had come before and why it must never happen again. And in the evenings, when the sky turned gold and the wind softened, Kale and Elira would walk together beyond the council hall, not as monarchs, not as saviors, but as two souls who had found peace in each other. One night, as they stood watching the stars bloom above them, Kyle turned to her and said, "Do you remember the first night I spoke to you?" Elira smiled. "You told me I believed a story." "I did," he said, "but I never thought you'd write a new one." She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. Neither did I. Below them, the fields were quiet. The snow was long gone, replaced by green, by growth, by something worth protecting. Not with swords, but with choice. Elira looked up at the stars and whispered, "This is our kingdom." Kyle nodded, "And it lives because we chose it." Not all stories end with a crown. Some end with a promise, one that is kept. And so, from the ashes of betrayal, from the fire of forbidden love and the silence of long-buried truths, a new world rose. A world not ruled by fear, but by courage, by fire, and by love. Sometimes the greatest power isn't found in bloodlines or thrones, but in the courage to choose your own path, even when the world expects you to follow another. What would you have done in Elira's place? Would you have chosen love or loyalty? Tell us in the comments below. Your voice matters in this kingdom we're building together. And don't forget, the next story is already waiting for you on the screen. A new tale, a new secret, and maybe a new destiny. Click now to dive in.